Shane Young is going to tell us all about the project in Memphis. Shane, thank you.
How's everybody doing? What? I want to know who's excited to make opportunities for young people tonight. Isn't that why we're here? So I forced them to let me be a speaker because I usually have to stand on my toes to see the speaker, but now you have to stand on your toes to see me. So I could just sit here and yell at you about Memphis and Memphis inner city rugby. I know most people here have probably not been to Memphis, but I don't want to yell at you. So we're going to show you a short video. It's an abbreviated version of a short documentary on Amazon Prime called The Rugby Boys of Memphis, which tells the story of Memphis inner city rugby through the eyes of one of our most decorated alums, Calvin Gentry, who is actually now my roommate, or as most people here probably say, my flatmate. So he's my roommate, which means he lives with me. And we're going to show a short film about our story through his eyes. We're so proud of him, and we'll speak more about that just here in a minute. Thank you.
Hey, so Shane bullied me into speaking very briefly before I turn over him and tell the story here. But I'm very grateful to be in this room. I'm very privileged to be in this room. It's an unbelievable honor to be up in front of you all today to tell you a very brief story about when Calvin was about this high. And back 8 years ago, when in his eyes, Shane and I were some awkward white dudes from upstate that were wearing short shorts and handing him a watermelon and said, let's go run, let's go do something with this. Because the game was foreign and it had never been played in Memphis. And at that time, we were teachers. And at that time, I was walking into a school, Kingsbury High School, that had 1,000 kids in it, of whom 50% would graduate. And I was 22 years old, coming from up from the Hudson Valley. I had a very fortunate upbringing. I've been afforded many privileges in my life. And one of the first privileges I had in that building was Coach Williams gave me a wand, a metal detector wand. He said, stand at the front door, and when the bell rings, pat everybody down, make sure nobody brings any guns into the building. And I was the enforcer. I was the wall. And that was my first day in that school, at Kingsbury High School. And I didn't know what the hell I was doing, but I knew how to play rugby, and I knew that I had amazing kids in my classroom that didn't get a fair shot. And I knew that there weren't textbooks in that building, and I knew that there weren't teachers in that building. There were permanent substitutes. And kids would show up to class and they'd kick their feet up on the desk, and nobody would engage them and say, hey, I believe in you and I think you can do something. Nobody. And after school, the bell would ring and they would go out into a neighborhood where cops got shot. Objectively, that happened. And there was like 11 kids on the baseball team. And so rugby ball's like $20, whatever. Shane and I went out to a public park wearing those short shorts, and we said, this is rugby. And we love this, and we think you love it too. And we think through this game, you'll find a brotherhood here in Memphis and around the world. Like this room. We think that through this sport, you can learn things like toughness in the face of adversity and brotherhood. And you can learn just how strong you are, and you can learn just how far you can go. And before you knew it with that team, we had teachers saying, hey, Abdul just stayed after school yesterday, and he turned in all his homework. He didn't used to do that. And Perez's mom was like, he's a new guy. He's showing up to school early. He wants to be there, and he's staying late. And we started getting feedback that kids were turning things around. And we started calling our study halls Rugby College Prep. Kids would sit in our room and we'd do homework and stuff. And we'd make sure they filled out their college applications. And they showed up because they loved rugby. And that was a word that wasn't familiar in their neighborhood. And when they told their parents I play rugby, they'd be like, okay, I hope that's good. I hope that's a good thing. I hope that's a positive thing in your life. But they didn't know. And it was an incredible privilege to have the opportunity to work with those students and work in those communities and to meet guys like Calvin that today are changing the game. And they're changing the game because of the generosity of people like you in this room. And Shane's going to talk more about where we're headed as an organization. But just to give you a very brief snippet, I'm currently the executive director of an organization called Harlem Lacrosse. I don't really give a shit about lacrosse, to be honest. It's not something I care about. I miss rugby a lot. I wish I was wearing number 11. But I do believe that non-traditional sports provide non-traditional opportunities. And I do know from being a teacher and from being in Memphis that too many good kids in this country don't get good opportunities. And I do know that rugby can be the best opportunity that can teach them about how great they can be and can show that somebody cares about them and believes in them and they have a brotherhood behind them and they can achieve great things. And Shane's going to talk more about that, but I want to thank the Atlas Foundation. I want to thank all of you for believing in us, for believing in this vision, and for the power of the sport of rugby to change the world. I really do believe that's something that we can achieve together tonight, and certainly it's an amazing honor to be here to celebrate the launch of that in the United States. There's so many kids that don't get a fair shot in this country. There's so many kids that are born into circumstances that if I were born into them, I certainly wouldn't be up here, that's for sure. But rugby was one of those things that taught me I could be up here, and there's harder things than doing this. So I'm going to turn around to Shane, and he's going to tell you more about what we're at today.
Can you tell that we're pretty serious about equity and opportunity for kids in our country and in our regions and in our most poor communities? Well, if you couldn't tell, we are very serious about it. And when you see Calvin, we want to challenge you to think of him as a human being, obviously, and a symbol for what's possible. Because Calvin comes from the underbelly of one of America's poorest cities, in fact, ranking #1 in child poverty, in one of the communities in Memphis called Orange Mound, which is even a deeper reflection of the outcomes that poverty can have on a child in Memphis. Grew up in a home with his grandmother, mom not around, dad not around, social emotional regulation, really troublesome. Teachers could not keep him in class, smart as a whip though, and rugby was his outlet. And Calvin is just one of so many examples of where this has worked the right way, and where investments, philanthropic investments, have been made into a poor community very efficiently. Rugby's cheap to play, right? So I have a real big problem with some of the ways that we run rugby in our country. And I'm not gonna go here on a soapbox about USA Rugby and how we can all do better, because we're in this room to do that, aren't we? But when Devin got hired as executive director of Harlem Lacrosse, I'm like, man, we need him in rugby. But there's opportunity in lacrosse, because that's a sport that across the country is pretty well taken care of financially, isn't it? There's a lot of good financial backing in the sport of lacrosse. And it's almost like the sport of rugby just wasn't ready to retain a talent and a leader like Devin to continue to make targeted investments into the social infrastructures and cities, communities that are deep in poverty. We know we can make an impact, but how do we do it without infrastructure and investment? So Atlas does that around the world. They find leaders and cities and countries that have some of the toughest circumstances for children, and they vet programs that already exist or are about to exist, and they make targeted investments to support those programs. I remember in 2016, I was a full-time teacher at the high school that Calvin went to. And my job, Devin's job was to be the wand guy in the beginning of the school day. My job was to keep 200 students seated and quiet in a cafeteria to eat lunch by myself. And we were broke as an organization. We were just coaching who we could and doing what we can. And I get a phone call from a foreign zip code, and I knew there was something called Atlas that was checking us out, and I knew I was gonna get a foreign phone call at some point, and it happened when I was in charge of 200 kids in the cafeteria by myself. So I started sweating a little crazy like I am right now, and I just look at the phone, I'm like, and I just bust out the doors, and I'm talking to Sally, CEO of the Atlas Foundation, and trying to explain how great it is what we're doing in Memphis, how bad we need the support. And we're so blessed that at such a crucial time, when our bandwidth was stretched to the max, and we didn't know if we were gonna keep going or not, because we're 24, 25-year-old young men with no lives, can't get a girlfriend, too busy running rugby and typing up proposals and applying to grants, driving kids home, refereeing our own matches, begging for cleats, no lives. And then Sally calls and says, we believe in what you're doing, and we wanna help and give you some breathing room. And that catapulted us into more investments and more opportunities. And now I'm very blessed because I get to do this job full time. And now Calvin is getting paid by our organization to be a coach and a referee and a mentor to the kids that came after him. And now half of our organization is young women. And please clap. And we've been able to tally up more than $500,000 in rugby scholarships and scholarships that we've directly helped our student athletes earn. 70% of our 30-person coaching staff in Memphis is our own alums. So we started as an education-based group where we turned teachers into rugby coaches, and those teachers coach those kids who are now coaching the kids that are in their community. And we believe it's very important to have leaders and mentors that are doing rugby coaching and making the influence be children of color. and people who look like and represent the communities that they're serving, because our kids deserve to have role models that look like them and come from those communities. So last couple points here is that rugby's not good enough. I love rugby. I'm so obsessed with the sport. And I know that the sport itself isn't good enough to solve the problems that we're trying to solve. We can't walk into poor communities and say, here's a rugby ball. You know, put down the drugs and guns, kids. We got rugby. It doesn't work like that. Okay? We have to introduce rugby with extremely talented leaders, with a good strategic plan, with the support and infrastructure where the kids we're coaching can eventually be the leaders of the programs that we're starting. And I really appreciate Atlas for seeing that in us, in a small place like Memphis, where we could barely get charities, businesses, and foundations at the time in our own city to believe in us. Took somebody overseas to do that, and now everyone's following suit. And we're just so happy about that. We know it's not good enough just to do rugby. We have to do a great job by our student athletes and by our coaches and by anyone we're engaging in this special opportunity. So it's up to us in this room. The sport of rugby is broke in our country. We don't have a surplus of funds to go invest from the governing body level and make these special things happen. We have a talent scarcity. There's not just people floating around the country saying, I can go implement this program, and yeah, I have connections to inner city schools. I have support. I know somebody. It's really up to us in this room. It's really up to us. And Atlas USA is going to give us the opportunity to take the model of MICR and all the other nonprofits they've worked with across the world and make the best of it at more sites here in the USA. So that's why we're here tonight, and we have such an opportunity to do it. And so I'm challenging you to be part of the Atlas family, believe in this project, because 5-10 years from now, when we're serving, when we've raised those $10 million, and we're serving those million kids, everyone's going to want to be part of it because it's going to be special. It's going to be special. And I really just appreciate the opportunity to share our story with you and let you know that we're just getting started, because Atlas USA is here to stay. So thank you so much. I'm going to introduce our auctioneer.